So all the basic structural things, alignment, placement, feet shoulder width, parallel, nice full contact with the feet against the ground, except for the arch. So having a little hollow or a little space in the arch, preventing any collapsing inward on the arch and the knees falling in. So knees right over the feet. If you have a tendency for the feet to rotate inward onto the arch, just have a little more intention along the outside edges of the feet. Just enough to have somewhat of a counter of the physical tendency to roll in. You don't want to stand on the blades, outside blades of the feet. You just move your attention, energize the outside edges of the feet. An approach I like to do, and that might become more accessible later on, it's as if the knees are magnetically repulsed away from each other. Belly released. Tailbone pointing straight to the ground. So the sacrum hanging, the hip cage is hanging. Lower back is approaching straight. Chest is relaxed. Let the weight of the arms and hands pull the shoulders straight down. Back crown of the head is pointing straight up, even as the tailbone is pointing straight down. And to a large extent, this is helping to align the skeleton vertically, bone over bone, generally speaking, vertical alignment of the skeletal structure. More and more, we want to give all the weight over to the skeletal structure. The bones are the weight-bearing instruments of the body. We want to give all that work of standing over to the girders of the body, the girders of the skyscraper. So we have to align the girders, get that steel infrastructure aligned so it can be a good, stable, strong support. And then we use that support for what it's designed for. So we give the weight over to the bones, but only if and when the bones are vertically aligned. Otherwise, we're only aggravating the quality of being pulled out of alignment and freezing muscles in a shape that prevent vertical alignment. So it's a long process, and having those muscles release and to not hold. So that verticality is an important first step.
And so a question I have from like earlier work where practicing that kind of release, but was happening with the structure that was not optimally aligned. And so I think the question is, what's the process of checking alignment? You know, I know for myself, I've come much closer to it over the years, but it's been a process of years. And so like how to continue to check about which direction you're headed in terms of more aligned or into a place that you're loading stresses that just now I'm familiar with this version of stress of my body. It's different than the old one, so it must be better, right?
So that's where a mirror comes in, especially when you're new and still working and figuring this out, experimenting with this. So a mirror, having to look sideways and being as objective as you can and as clear as you can with your observation. And then it's really important to have a partner who knows what they're looking for to guide you, so they can look from the outside.
So standing against a wall is not necessarily a good enough feedback.
Standing against the wall is a good approximation, but you don't want to have your lower back necessarily flush to the wall. So we're not actively, literally wanting the back in general to be ramrod straight, although we often mention we want a straight back and we're elongating the back so it's hanging long and straight. We just mean towards straight, or much straighter than what it tends to be for most people. So we don't want an actual line, so not such that if you're back up to a wall, that your whole entire back is flush to the wall, including the back of your neck and the lower back. So we don't want that literally, totally, completely straight. But we're going towards that. So it's just like a hanging skeleton. Of course, there is a gentle S shape to the spine. So it's a very, very, very subtle S shape. So we're elongating that S, but not eradicating that S curve. So you can't really do it with an inner sense without looking to a mirror first or having someone look from the outside. Then once you have a sense of what directions you need to go to get closer to straight, then you can start to work with that on your own, because you have a feeling direction and what parts of the spine need to go in what direction. And then it's just releasing from there. So an imagery that we often use is the muscles hang off the bones, like soft or melted rubber. But whenever we use imagery like that, it always tends to create a bit of a droop in the skeletal structure, a little bit of collapsation in the posture. Whenever we think of, we'll often say pouring down, melting down, sinking, or again, the hanging tissues, it tends to pull everything down. So we counter that, 100% countering that with a verticality and the stacking of the bones. Another time we'll get further into space between the bones. So when we say stacking, that's just alignment. That's not bone on top of bone. In fact, we want that space to expand and open. Literally, we'll open the joints, have an expansion in all the joints. But alignment-wise, it's you think of bone on top of bone, vertebrae on top of vertebrae, even though.
And so one of the tendencies I notice is, it feels like my tailbone lower, that S curve of the spine sort of elongates and lowers, is the tendency to sort of pivot on top of my legs so that my pelvis, it's like I'm tucking under. Just because that feels like the logical geometry, right? If you extend the lower part of the S, then you take that very heavy pelvis weight and roll back on your femur heads, and that's not
so becoming like a pelvic tilt towards a pelvic tilt.
Yeah, the sort of and it does feel like my spine's elongated, but now I'm off of my base.
Right. That's a very, very good point. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's something that happens very often, that people will tend to roll forward towards a pelvic tilt. And as you say, in an endeavor to lengthen the spine, and they'll often feel that, but that's not the approach to do it, because that completely misaligns the pelvis and the spine. So that's a very good point, because often that's a person's first exploration attempt to lengthen the lower back. And all that they have available to them in their awareness is to. So we definitely do not want to do a pelvic tilt. The hips do rotate somewhat forward. That's why we'll often say pointing the tailbone towards the ground, but not really forward. not really pointing it forward to any large degree, pointing it towards. That starts to rotate the hips and starts to stretch open the lower back.
And feels more like I'm sitting on top of my legs rather than like tucking my tail through my legs.
Right.
Yeah.
And tucking your tail between the legs, again, is definitely not what we want. And that phrase tends to suggest a tightening to do that. And so we want everything to be releasing and, in fact, falling eventually. Everything's just falling directly down vertically. That does take a developed strength in the legs, which standing will develop.
And so I guess towards the beginning, it feels like two contradictory processes. So you're opening and elongating in your spine. And as that loads the legs, what I notice is the tension level seems to go immediately upwards. So the top half of me feels great, and the bottom half is increasingly, feeling some discomfort as more loads in.
Mm-hmm. This is very intensive work, contrary to how it looks from the outside and how one would think about it before they actually try to do it. Because the knees are unlocked, it puts all the work into the legs. And because we're aligning the hips, releasing the hips, so more of the weight is actually falling directly into the legs, which is really what we want. So it takes time to build up the strength and the stamina of the legs. So you go in and out of this in the beginning and do other leg strengthening exercises. Tai Chi squats, staying lower in whatever set or physical discipline you're doing. Do it with a slightly deeper knee bend. Maintain that knee bend. Walking is good. And emphasizing all the things that we do in standing into the walking will more directly work the legs. So we need to develop that strength and stamina before we can actually be able to stand properly long enough for the releasings to occur, the changes to occur, the transformations to occur. So that's a process, and it takes some dedication developing that strength. It's not just strength, it's stamina to go with that strength. So the irony is you can't hang out, quote unquote, hang out without good leg strength and stamina. Without that leg strength and stamina, we're always holding up, standing up, holding on, we're tightened in, and we're tightened up. We can't, quote unquote, hang out.
Well, and I'm noticing, like, it's not just having rock hard quads or something isn't quite it either, because each, my ankles and my knee joints and my hip joints, if they're not working together well, then I notice my knees start to ache, or, it's like they have to work together to receive the weight. It's not just like, oh, I've got big legs and so I can take that in. Or I guess the question is, like, it's not just a muscle fiber strength we're talking about.
So release, yes, release is universal and total, even in the muscle groups we are using. So definitely in standing, we do have to use the leg muscles for standing, the leg tissues. But that begins to change and refine and evolve as well. So it's really good to know that you don't want to be standing with tight thighs, clenched muscles. At first, that's what has to occur. That's how people are standing. So it's really good just to know that we're going to move away from that direction, moving away from contraction and moving toward openness, emptying, expansion, not contraction. And so that's a big part of the development over time, and that's a very deep process in itself. In the midst of the exertion, we're actually opening and emptying. A normal action is to contract any exertion, any effort, any action is done through contraction. Everybody's standing in contraction. Everybody's in and up, holding on is contraction. And it's exactly the opposite direction. And in fact, that's actually a useful, at least mental tool that will help some people, is you just send that work, that contractive direction, the opposite direction. Intention direction is the opposite direction of contraction. So to put it on that simple basis, and it's even good to contrast. If I tighten my leg muscles and kind of exaggerate the normal way of standing with my thigh muscles, with my calves, and the shins, Achilles tendon. So I'm contract that. I'm standing. So of course we need to contract. We use our muscles. We have to contract. Just go in the opposite direction intentionally. The intentional direction is the opposite direction. So you're flowing out from your legs, outward into the space around you. And if one direction is more intuitive or easy for you, like forward or what have you, but ultimately you're expanding out in all directions. As long as you're going out and playing with this feeling of, well, contracting is coming in and holding, I want to do the exact opposite of that. 180 degree direct opposite from that contraction direction, intentionally flowing outward. That's with the legs. It's actually every part of the body, but we want to really work with that with the legs because we're standing with the legs, and the legs will contract muscularly. Over time, we'll get more into working with the fascia and emptying those legs and the rest of the body. But a good start is to know that the normal direction is inward, in and up, contractive, and the internal arts is basically generally completely 100% direction in the opposite way. So just in terms of mental, intentional direction, outward instead of inward. Apply that to all parts of the body, but especially when you feel the legs tightening and contracting. So that's worth working on for a few moments and noticing whatever work and tightness is in the legs and releasing that and in fact sending it in the opposite direction.
And so I'm wondering if you could, lots of people in the past today, yeah, wondering if you could, like in doing this, I noticed, it's quite different sensations in the legs because the use, even though we're standing, the usage feels different. To sort of talk a little bit about if people notice pain or like the difference between different sensation that's sort of uncomfortable and doing this in a way that might actually be creating pain for people. Like what would you suggest in terms of refining your, someone's sensitivity about what they're experiencing, what's okay or what's not okay, or because I've had experiences in doing standing work especially that have felt on the inside to be quite excruciating because I think layers of tension were coming undone, but it wasn't like stressor on the knee that creates joint pain, or it wasn't and receiving feedback from you that, oh, you're standing quite open, but inside I'm having this like cascade of what feels like painful, I can't stand a moment longer, and then finding in fact I'm quite released after that. But so it's sort of I found a lot of difficulty in starting this work. How do I differentiate all the sensations, and what are ones that I need to pay heed to as, okay, time to take a break, or this is too far? And maybe it's about like how do you overtrain when you're doing standing meditation, and what are the signs?
Right. So first thing I think I want to say is if this is new, approach it gingerly, off and on. Just stand for a minute or two at a time, and approach it frequently, but for short periods of time, so that those areas that are not well aligned and that are very contractive or misaligned, you're not going to go overboard in causing a lot of extreme pain or tweaking something or straining something. And then as quickly and as much as possible, you want to work on your alignment. So again, using the mirror, getting someone who knows these basic alignment mechanics to look at you from the side and slowly build up your standing time. It's not really the time itself, it's the quality in that time. So working that alignment as best you can is better. For 2 minutes is better than standing for 5 minutes, but you're just kind of hanging out in a way that is just kind of random. As far as pain itself, generally speaking, very generally speaking, if it's this is where you're really going to have to tune in and take care of yourself. And there is a difference, as you say, between a pain that should be attended to and responded to by stopping what you're doing or changing what you're doing, and a pain that is the pain of change and transitioning to a different way, transitioning to a different shape, a different length, different angle. And so there's going to be discomfort to that, and sometimes major discomfort to that, because we're literally not quite tearing open an old package to make a new package. It is slowly, gently tearing it. So it's like taking an old plasticine sculpture and pulling it and rearranging it. There's going to be some stress involved. There's going to be stress involved in those tissues, and there's no way to get around that. So just to know, just having the awareness that there is a difference between pain that's saying, okay, stop doing this now. You're even if you're going towards a better position, it's too much too soon, or you're simply just off in your alignment and you're just aggravating already improper alignment. Difference between that kind of pain, which this is wrong, and the kind of pain that's leading to transformation and change to a new position, a new alignment. So there is a difference. That is really on the person to be able to start to distinguish. Err on the side of less in the beginning. If you're not sure what that pain is telling you, try a different exercise, try a different posture, or go into something else, a movement, and readdress it again later on. So again, gingerly at first. But it's really, really important to know that this is changing the body, transforming it, and the body has concretized into a shape and a pattern. And it is, generally speaking, not going to feel good a lot of the time, or most of the time, for a while, as those tissues are gently coaxed and encouraged to come into a different stretch and alignment. That's not comfortable. That's uncomfortable. It's no different than if a person was, for whatever reason, either congenital misalignment or just sitting on the couch with their right elbow on the side of the couch for 20 years, their spine is curved or leaning to the right. And if someone were to just wrench them into an upright, vertical, correct position, that'd be excruciating, and that would be not good to do. And so that would be a pain that's telling you, okay, stop doing that right now. But to just gently encourage them, even just a millimeter, and have that millimeter change for a minute or two, will approach excruciating. But that kind of discomfort and even pain has to be journeyed through. Otherwise, that person will never get to being straight again. You'll often choose to stay in this very compromised, unhealthy alignment and posture because at least it's comfortable, at least I'm not in constant, that kind of pain I'm used to now, or discomfort I'm used to, or I don't even notice it. But to just even slowly move towards coming to alignment, I'm going to want to snap back to where I was over to the right. And as soon as you take that little bit of guidance, pressure off of me, I'm going to come right back to leaning to the right. And so I just have to know that that's normal, and that this is a process, and that this is changing tissue that has become shortened, contracted, and concretized into a position, and that position is not a good one. And so to change those tissues, we're back to, so we've talked about girders, the bones. So the tissues are the cables. The cables have become very rusted and very contorted. To start to stretch those cables out, you're going to hear the complaining of the wires. There's that sound as you pull the wires out and stretch them out. They make a sound. The tissues will be going through that. So that's a part of the process, and you have to have determination, long-term goals for this, and be gentle with yourself, but consistent and relentless. Otherwise, that person will snap back to leaning to the right. It will happen.
No, and it makes me think of, a functional anatomy teacher I work with was talking about, like, we've got cells working all the time to create the newest version of ourselves. All of our tissue types have this kind of repair and recreation. And when I think about, because the analogy of the girder is like we're living girders, though, right? Like it's not just one and done made. We're constantly remaking those cables, the materials of our personal steel, like our bones and whatnot. And so it kind of suggests to me, like, this kind of practice, this kind of determination that you're talking about over time is to give the chance of the cells to remake that longer, more released, more open person. And she mentioned there's some fairly recent research that says, like, when people have, like, plantar fasciitis, so, like, the bottom fascial on your feet get diseased, that literally the fibers are in chaotic formations, and they don't really know, does the disease cause it? Like it's a sort of chicken and egg right now, but with people with healthy, all the fibers run in one direction, right? They run along the line of the tissues. And so it's quite interesting to me to think about, okay, the need to do this kind of practice, as you say, like day by day, to do it, to come back to it. It's like it's giving instructions to those cells what kind of structure needs to be built.
Yeah, that's I like that that way of framing it. We're re-informing the body as tissues, and so whenever we're doing something, opening or aligning, it's good to have time where you just kind of hang out or even lay down and just absorb that new information. So tissues can absorb that new information. In other words, before you just go into your regular day, especially if you've done something that's, for example, opening up the shoulders or just anything standing where you notice, oh, that's really coaxing these tissues or these tendons or these muscles. It's kind of challenging them, and they're really being brought to a gentle limit. It's good to kind of just sit or lay down and just let the body absorb that and digest that information. So we're reinforming the body. We're giving it new places, new information, new sensations, a new place in the universe. And so we need to give it time to absorb that, assimilate that on a cellular level, on a tissue level. And related to that, when you start to open up the body, albeit even very slowly and even just a little bit, that can open you up, that will and can open you up emotionally as well. And so it can be an emotional response to close back down or clamp back down or go back to that old shape. It's become a familiar shape, if not a downright protective shape. And so opening up the body and its tissues will it's going to also open you up on all levels, and people can go through phases of feeling vulnerable. And also there's the aspect that the tissues themselves have memory. We're a living crystal, and all our past is in our tissues, in our cells, in our tissues, even in our DNA. And so as you start to open and release the body, you're awakening memories and allowing memories to have a space to move and rise up. So that concretization, that holding in, holding on, is always mentally, emotionally based. And so when we open up the system, the physical system, the mental and emotional energies that are embedded in there, they arise like bubbles arising in the water. It's like all this silt and stuff buried in the bottom of the lake, and you start to jostle the silt around, those bubbles start to rise up. So all those memories, fears, emotions, reactive patterns, all those things. As you open up, your heart opens up, your feelings arise and are exposed. So that's part of it. And that might be one of the reasons why also you approach it gingerly at first, little bit by little bit. What's important that it's consistent, rather than a little bit today, oh, that was hard either physically today or emotionally, that brought some things up, so maybe I'll approach that next week. That's not going to really go anywhere. It needs to be consistent, absolutely consistent, daily, several times a day. And if you're newer, whether it's physically or emotionally, you can back off at any time, as long as you get back to it very soon. And when you get back to it very soon, you can give yourself a contract that I'm only going to do it even for a less amount of time, shorter amount of time than last time, so that's safer for you. All the transformation becomes guaranteed, and it's guaranteed and written in the stars as long as you keep doing the training and the work. It is inevitable. It is the evolution that's in the tissues already. It's in the DNA. So this is a progressive evolutionary pattern script that's in the tissues that we're opening up to. It's a universal, becoming more universally aligned, more universally open, literally to the universe, a larger space and world around us. So it's part of our nature. We're just contracting to a smaller pre-history, de-evolutionary direction. So approach it bit by bit. Another strategy is continue the training, but maybe focus on something else that's tangential to it, that's related to it, but it's not addressing that physical situation or that emotional situation quite as head on. But see, that's a strategy, a management strategy. You're always still continuing to move forward and evolve and work, and you're committed to your transformation, and you're also caring for yourself and managing yourself. So that's the yin and the yang of it. Caring for yourself, you're nurturing for yourself, but you're not, and because you care for yourself, you're not willing to stay in the egg. You're willing to break out of the egg. You're not willing to let yourself stay in that slouch position, even though that's comfortable. You're going to take the uncomfortable route that's continually uncomfortable because you care for yourself, and you know there's another way, there's a transformational path, and there is further there is another paradigm energetically, physically, universally. And you know there is. And just like a mother or a parent, tough love with their child in that, different phases in our childhood. I don't want to go to school.
Right.
I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to meet new friends, or I don't like this, or ultimately a parent has to scoop them along. It's tough love because it's for their development, it's for their growth, it's for their personhood, it's their evolution, it's their natural destiny if they're not distorted before they can attain it. We're doing that for ourselves.
No, and when I've been in conversation with people I know that are practitioners of various sorts, listening across their stories, there's times when, particularly if they've had some kind of very early event or, something that I think could be legitimately categorized as trauma or abuse or something, there can be stages that going into that physical holding of that, is high emotional upset, high mental upset, and so the work needs to happen there, right? That maybe different responses are appropriate to really deal with the content of that. But I've also talked with people that, having done that work, come back and sort of touch into, the pattern's still in the tissues, maybe the emotional content's drained, and it's just working to open up another way, another possibility of how the tissues are. And there's not necessarily as much emotional content, or it could rise, but the intensity of that, so the work lies more in this physicality, more in the alignment, and to sort of view that as it's like this and it's always going to be like this. As you say, there's sort of a whole continuum or life cycle in working with yourself, that some things may be needed at this time and some things else might be needed at another time.
Yeah, and along those lines of maybe a lot of emotional work has been done, a lot of release or rebalancing or attending to has been done. And yes, there still can be the same areas of the body that are still tight and distorted, and it may not be terribly content filled with those emotional memories. Maybe a lot of them have been dissipated. Tissues and shape can be frozen and locked in darkness simply because of lack of awareness. That there's no light getting there. There's no awareness getting there. The ting does not reach in that area. The inner awareness, inner sensitivity. The light cannot go. It's too dense. That part of the body is too dense, opaque. So awareness, consciousness is not getting to that part of the body. And so the acuteness of the emotions may have been drained out and released. But this is interesting because we can do a lot of emotional work and deal with a lot of the acute trauma and kind of address the brunt force of a lot of that trauma coming out. But that's huge. That's wonderful. That's a big part of the evolutionary moving forward. But it doesn't end there, because there could be literally simply just there's no awareness there, there's no consciousness there, so there's a deadness there. So there's a part, we use this terminology a fair bit, there's an opaqueness to the body, a denseness to the body, and that is a non-aliveness, a deadness. And so I may have released a lot of my acute trauma, but that doesn't mean I'm fully alive, or it doesn't mean I'm fully, I want to say fully realized, but that term is used a lot in the meditation fields and all that, and it's not, I mean it more on a tissue basis, on an organic physical body, inhabiting the body.
I mean, one image that's coming to mind a little bit, like if the body takes on a kind of posture or habit of moving out of protection for something that happened, is that at a certain point, if you continue to work with yourself, there's a real expiration date for that. It's sort of like yogurt, that really it's no longer even the thing it was doing, it's just not functional at all, and needing something more alive to come through in that place, a new
Right.
possibility that has more living intelligence rather than the thing that worked because of the event 10 years ago or 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yes. So it's awareness based, developing awareness so that you notice when you're just at a plateau. You've done a lot of healing, done a lot of work, done a lot of releasing, or done some actual work, whether it's physical exercise or realignment or therapeutic physical work, and you've done that, and then you stay there. If you continue to sink your awareness in your body, if you continue to further and further dwell in your body, become more and more embodied, there's always intelligence coming back to you. You're always being fed intelligence from the body, from the tissues, and actually from the world around you, the universe around you, telling you that, okay, then now we're stagnant, and there's more now beyond this, where it's human nature to continue to stay at plateaus. The example I often think of is Mount Everest is littered with dead bodies going up. So there's always places where you can stop, but you don't have to stop there, but we tend to stop, especially if we've done some major work maybe, and that's far enough. I think that's, that took a lot of work to get here, and I faced a lot of demons to get here. And I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm tired of doing that now. I think I'm good now. Awareness and intelligence is always beckoning you. If you stay awake, sensitive, if you stay true, if you stay aligned, that living intelligence is always knocking at the door and letting you know what's next, and guiding you into what's next.